Pro Tour Edge of Eternities came and went with the bang, and it couldn't have been any better. Every deck in the top 8 was completely different, and Control even made it to the top, but Tameshi Belcher ultimately took the win. In a video last week, I was talking about the pros and cons of said diversity, or maybe lack thereof at the deeper level. And with that, it does have a lot of effects downstream on even the tier 2 and tier 3 level of Modern. There are a lot of good and viable decks in the format, Mill being one of them. In today's video, I wanted to take a look at my favorite deck in the Modern format for years at this point, and take a look at where it's at right now. One of the key cards that's been a cornerstone in the deck for a very long time, and how it might not be worth it right now. Where does Mill need to go to survive in such a diverse metagame, and one that's actually really interactive, highly oppressive, and just very fast. The card in question today is Tasha's Hideous Laughter that is the topic of discussion. I think there's a lot of back and forth about a card like this, because it's been a playset in the deck, it's not been in the deck, it's been a 2 of, it's been a 3 of, it's been in the sideboard, and not. There's a lot of orientations of this card that's coming out of Adventures of the Forgotten Realm, and one that made a pretty big splash. I think Fractured Sanity was probably the more notable one, honestly, coming out of the Modern Horizons set, Modern Horizons 2 specifically, just being able to come out on 3 in Mill 14, getting around hexproof effects being a lot more relevant at the time with Veil of Summer, but also just being able to cycle in Mill 4 and draw a card, an uncounterable source of mill that really proved relevant against the Teferi Time Raveler strategies and Narset brews. But when it comes to Tasha's Hideous Laughter, this is a card that really only serves one purpose: to snipe out a specific style or styles of deck when it comes to converted mana cost. Blue, and 1 for sorcery, each opponent exiles cards from the top of their library until that player has exiled cards with a total mana value of 20 or greater. The key to this is that if you exile 19 cards and the converted mana cost is up to 19 or 18 or whatever it is, and then that last card you exiled 20 is going to be 8 converted mana cost, 7, whatever it is. If it pitches over, you still get to exile that card. It's not like that doesn't get exiled. So you get value from the random moments where the last card really means a lot. But at the end of the day, you are trying to match this card's rate up to Fractured Sanity. Fractured Sanity, again, is blue, and blue to Mill 14 all the time. And it even, again, has the flexibility of drawing you one card. But Tasha's Hideous Laughter gives you the value proposition of potentially going more. In the low converted mana cost decks that are primarily 0, if you take a look at something like the Amulet Titan deck that tends to have a lot of lands in it, about half the strategy, then a lot can be exiled out of decks like that. But when it comes to the rest of the Modern metagame, if you take a look at that top 8, there's actually a lot of high converted mana cost cards. And I think based on recent results, it's actually really surprising to me, and especially someone who's now finally getting to play and finding the time to play more challenges right now. You're going to be getting a lot more competitive content in that side for 1v160 card. I've been really struggling with Tasha's Hideous Laughter, and part of that is, I'm gonna have to admit, pilot skill, mulliganing. There's a lot of decisions that come to how good Tasha's can be in a game. You know, what are you surgically and all that. But at the end of the day, I find this card to really struggle just in the vacuum, in that blank scenario where this is the card in your hand, it's not Glimpse the Unthinkable, it's not Fractured Sanity, you have to throw out Tasha's because it's the spell to cast, and it just goes nowhere. It's 3 mana Mill 7, exile 7 to be honest, and 3 mana Mill 8, 10. Sometimes you hit 14, 15. If you're hitting 20 plus, you're through the roof here. But that's only against specific matchups and or the extremely lucky scenario. Half the times when it's not against those good matchups where Tasha's is good, that lucky scenario is actually worst case scenario if you really think about it, because then you're exiling the cards that you don't really care about, and it's now more likely that they're going to draw the high converted mana cost stuff. So let's really break down Tasha's Hideous Laughter and why I don't think this card is good anymore in the Mill deck. There are places where it's good, but I think statistically speaking, this card is just not worth it anymore. Now, the Modern metagame, as I mentioned, is really diverse at the top. There was a video last week talking about how that diversity may actually be a bit of a sham. The play patterns also do matter, talking about how fast the Modern format is. And part of that discussion is actually really relevant: the speed of the format, the oppressiveness of the format, the all-in while also being able to protect each other. The Affinity deck is actually a really good example of one that has the Pinnacle Emissary from Edge of Eternities, but allows you to poop out a whole board of just 1/1 drones. And even if they don't follow up with the Blastoise, after that, the Kappa Cannoneer, then, they still have a board, generally speaking, of like five 1/1s that, you know, can only block flyers, but they're flying in the air anyway. So a simple removal spell or a fatal push isn't that relevant. And honestly, if you take a look at the majority of the metagame here, board wipes just aren't that relevant. Modern is a format where individual threats are just powerful enough by themselves. Again, board wipes just won't do it. And with the kind of spew of combo decks, the high mana decks that are playing and cheating on mana cost in some way to play bigger threats, the converted mana cost of cards in this format are generally higher. There's cheating, there's efficiency going on, affinity or evoke costs or just warp costs in general. There's a lot of things that have high converted mana costs that are being cast for less. It's an environment that's not great for Tasha's in general. Again, there's places for it to succeed. Of course there is. If you take a look at something like Is It Prowess, which we'll talk about in a second, but it doesn't mean that it's worth it for the large majority of the time. Really, the discussion, I think, anchors on this winning list from Ziriak. Now, Ziriak is someone that's been successful with Mill for a while now. If you take a look at their player profile, they've been kind of playing for a while and placing really well for a while. And one thing I think is worth pointing out here is part of this is going to be pilot skill. They made it to first place in a modern challenge, especially because of that pilot skill. And they played with 4 Tasha's Hideous Laughter. And I thought, hey, now that I finally have the time for some challenges, I'm going to run this list through. I got to about, you know, along leagues and everything, about 30 to 40 games of this. And honestly, that's within the last week. That's a lot more than many people. But honestly, the sample size in the grand scheme of things is relatively small. But one thing I continuously found, outside of me being a relatively mid, if not poor Magic player, is that, again, as I mentioned, in the mid scenarios, Tasha's Hideous Laughter just doesn't seem to work. It's never exiling enough. And heck, against the blue decks, it's such a high proposition for a card like this to even resolve when you're behind and on the draw. You'd rather just be a Fractured Sanity, or have this have been a Glimpse, which you could have cast earlier. You could have just continued to held up interaction on your turn 3. There's a lot going on with Tasha's Hideous Laughter that is just not working with the rest of this strategy, especially now with Surgical Extraction being relatively agreed with to being a playset in the main board of decks like this. It's just better off that you're putting cards into people's graveyards. And that's not without saying that there are cards that are going to enter graveyards anyway. There are a lot of reanimator strategies in the format, there are a lot of popular ones. But you also have to get a lot of combo pieces. If you take a look at Esper Goryo's, yeah, you want to Surgical the Frogs, but you also have to Surgical the Goryo's Vengeance. Once you Surgical the Goryo's Vengeance, the rest of the big cards, such as the Atraxas, don't really matter, which is great. You're now blanking out large parts of their deck that may be in their hand, or you get milled out later and you don't really have to worry about it. But then again, it highlights the other problem of the fact that you still have the Frog. You know, you are playing against modern decks that aren't just about one strategy anymore. Modern is very efficient. Mill is unfortunately behind having only one plan. It just does that plan really well with the help of some support cards, again, like Surgical Extractions and Archive Trap being free. There is a leverage to which the kind of modern Mill deck is trying to take advantage of and pull that leverage and take advantage of it as much as possible. But it's not far enough anymore. Mill is officially behind again. And it feels like it's at the times of kind of the Mesmeric Orb days, but I don't want to go too far into it. I'm rambling at this point. I'm kind of bearing the lead on where I want to end this video. Next up, I think where we want to go is the Pro Tour decks. So there are 3 decks in the Pro Tour that ultimately registered for Pro Tour Edge of Eternities, the modern format, and they had varying levels of success. This one from Matt Zhu went 2 and 3, and part of the reason that you have to kind of take some of this with a grain of salt is also that there was a draft element kind of involved here. Obviously, bad matchups can be a thing. The modern metagame overall, if you haven't figured it out, is relatively hostile to Mill, but there are good matchups in and around if you can make things work. But again, draft is involved, so it's not the whole picture to just see the matchups. But you're going to see here even that Tasha's Hideous Laughter is kind of 2 and 3. This player went 2 and 3 with Tasha's Hideous Laughter. 1 Visions, 4 Surgical. Generally speaking, like, it's pretty stock. You have the consigns, extirpates, like you have a little bit of everything that kind of makes sense. Next, you have Jody Keith, who again is playing for Tasha's Hideous Laughter. Pretty standard sideboard as well for consign, 3 extirpate. Rest of it is some amount of crypts and removal spells. It seems like that is the general idea of what you want to be doing for Mill at this point. But then Alexander Kantz here actually went 6 and 4 in the Pro Tour Edge of Eternities ladder here, and did not play Tasha's at all, which I think was to his benefit or their benefit. I'm making an assumption here. I'm not sure. Glimpse the Unthinkable at 3, and 7 cantrips, 4 visions, 3 preordained. That's actually really interesting. The cantrips is actually a whole different point of discussion that I would love to actually hear Alexander's thoughts on. And I believe they were in the middle Discord today talking about how in their testing, they're actually doing really well with it. Orcish Buildmasters isn't that popular, which is kind of interesting for Visions of Beyond. It gives you more space to play it, but then also playing 4 Glimpse also gives you the room to be playing something like that. It's interesting to see that Visions can be a playset again. It hasn't been for a while. Usually you play 1 to 2 Visions, and you might play a Jace the Perfected Mind to be a bad combat trick, a bad Visions of Beyond, and a bad Fractured Sanity, but to be a 5th copy of all 3 of those cards, it's actually a pretty good value proposition. So Jace tends to be a one of in these strategies. And so Alexander was ultimately able to get up here, again, through a mix of draft kind of competence, a little bit of luck in the matchups, but also pilot skill. Alongside that, the deck list has to lend to that. We have 4 consigns in the sideboard, some extirpates, and some removal. Pretty stock in that case. The difference being no Tasha's Glimpse. That works more so with the plan of the Visions Beyond we're seeing it at 4 and the surgical extractions as well. And so with that, we have to go to understanding why the Tashas won't work. This is a Python script that was written by someone that actually no longer is in the Mill Discord. And I've actually wanted to pick their brain forever. They haven't been for a while. But we have this pinned in the Mill Discord, link down below, as the Tasha's Hideous Laughter calculator. And this is like I'm going to showcase it right here. Check this out. So if you pop into the Mill Discord, kind of pop down here, Tasha's Hideous Laughter right here. If you just kind of click to it here, what this link does is opens it up to you here, and you can import your kind of deck list. And what you do is you add a second column where you not only add the first column, you add the quantities of the cards in that deck list, but also the converted mana cost of said card. What you then do is you run the script and a plot gets exported. And that plot is going to be the general average of what you can do against that strategy if you hit them with the Tasha's Hideous Laughter. Now, there's a couple of variables that this doesn't necessarily take into account of that you can kind of manage in terms of the amount of cards drawn in that state, what's left over. So in a perfect scenario where time isn't of an issue, you could surgical someone, then take a look at the rest of their deck list. And then what you can do is you can edit the kind of copies of certain cards that are left and see what happens, and then run the calculator and see how good your Tasha's is. What the plot then shows us is we want at 3 mana, because at 2 mana we can mill 10, and at 3 mana, the best we can do is mill 14 consistently, right? That Fractured Sanity is our rate, okay? Fractured Sanity for 3 blue mills 14. We want Tasha's on average to be milling somewhere in the range of 13 to 15. Exile is fine, but that's really what we want. Anything more is amazing. 20 plus is absolutely insane in game winning. But then under 13 is where it starts to get kind of problematic. 12 is fine. 11 is okay. 10 is where it starts to get real problematic because now you're paying 1 more for the same rate of Glimpse the Unthinkable. Now, to be fair, Glimpse the Unthinkable is a little bit harder to cast in that sense. In a deck that's very blue heavy, playing 4 blue basics on average alongside 4 Field of Ruins, you're going to be finding more blue than black on average. Blood Moon's not really that relevant in the format right now, although it is an affinity in decks like that. And so it does have a place. You do have to play around it. And so having blue, if not blue for Fractured, can, not happen in certain matchups. But when you cast that Tasha's Hideous Laughter, you want it to have an impact. And so what we're seeing is this kind of median line, right? So this middle line that we see, that is pretty much the middle of what you're going to be getting, right? You are going to be against Tameshi Belcher and Eldrazi Ramp. You're going to be milling less than 10, and even Simic Neoform and Eldrazi Tron, you're going to be milling less than 10 cards on average, and Domain Zoo and Esper Gorios is about pretty much 10 cards. That means for the vast majority of the format, you are not going to be milling anywhere close to the rate that you want. You're going to be milling at a rate of Glimpse the Unthinkable for the vast majority of the format. So you might as well just play Glimpse the Unthinkable at a lower rate. At a sooner turn, opening up the space for you to go Crab, then on 1, then land drop, mill some, play Glimpse, then land drop, mill some, play Fractured Sanity. You play to your curve even better. Now, of course, there's matchups like Boros Energy, top of the modern metagame right now, very relevant. Tasha's Hideous Laughter does have value against them, especially there being some level of graveyard synergy sometimes based on if they have a seasoned Pyromancer or not. Usually it's like kind of a split based on what people prefer. Sometimes they have it, sometimes they don't. Amulet 10 is actually really nice. What these bars actually represent, the blue, to my knowledge, knowledge, if I remember correctly, is the average. The kind of clear line here is the extremes, right? That's unlikely, but it's the extreme. So, you know, Eldrazi, Domain, Simic Uniform, Eldrazi Tron can be really as low as 5, some even as low as 2. Amulet Titan, you can get really crazy up there, like 25 plus. On average, you're looking to closer to kind of 17 to 18, and sometimes even that 20 range, which is really great, especially when you compare this to, you know, additional things like Surgical Extraction. If you played against Amulet Titan, if you surgical out their Amulet Titan, their prime time, then this average is going to go up, and that's kind of the value of it. And so we can kind of see that now. If we were to take this kind of graph here, if we were to go back to kind of Amulet Titan, or here I have Boros Energy right here, Eldrazi, Izzet, Zoo. I can show you how this works right now. So if I was to take out all of the prime times right now, so if I find, where is Primeval Titan? Where is the Amulet of Vigor? Oh, is this? Oh no, here it is. Primeval Titan. So I'm gonna take that out right now, and I'm gonna rerun the list. And now you can see that from this list being generated here, Primetime shoots up. Primetime shoots up right now. If I go trinket.plot, it now shoots up to an average of 25 to an extreme being even 35. Right? Like the amount of things that you can mill over. And now we're starting to see how this can really change for certain decks. And that's kind of the value of something like this. Not you, Demi. We don't need all that. Okay. We don't need all that right now. Let's just take out our tabs. So with that in mind, Tasha's Hideous Laughter on average is just not going to be doing great. Against the Tameshi Belcher deck, Surgical is really powerful, Tasha's is not. Amulet Titan, Surgical is going to be relevant, Tasha's is going to be relevant, but in general, as history has shown us, Amulet Titan has been a great matchup for us anyway. Boros Energy is one of our worst matchups in the metagame, just because of it being a quantity deck. Surgical Extraction is not relevant, and Tasha's Hideous Laughter has its relevancy, but the archetype is really fast, so you're valuing your removal early instead of just milling them anyway. On top of that, Eldrazi ramp, the Tasha is not going to work. Surgical has value and you do want it. You're probably bringing in extirpates anyway. You want to be able to get rid of Emrakul's, the Emrakul, the Promised End, and some of their lands. Domain Zoo, just such high converted mana costs. It's just, even if you surgical out the 12 cost Scion of Draco, you're having to deal with ley lines, you're having to deal with other cards. You're just playing a game from behind by constantly trying to dodge the burn spells while having your fatal pushes up for everything else. Esper Goryo's is such a frustrating plan to play against, because you can surgical out the Goryo's Vengeance, but then by the time you're doing that and fill their graveyard, you have to then dodge Psychic Frog, which can work against your surgical extractions by activating and removing the cards in your graveyard that you're trying to target with surgical. And then it also defeats your Drown in the Locks. So once you're done with that combo, they resolve the Psychic Frog, which is insanely hard to defeat, especially post board where they have Spell Pierces, they have Mystical Disputes, they have the Force of Negations. It's so hard to interact with this deck on every single angle at once. And so naturally speaking, a mid-range deck that is blue-based, that has a combo finish, we're going to struggle with. And Tasha's isn't that great as a 3-mana sorcery for a proposition of a card that, you know, you want to resolve. It's not working out for you. Is it prowess? Tasha is actually really good against this matchup, really good. And this is why, against, you know, the fact that Boros Energy it's so good against, is it prowess extremely bad matchup for us. It's just too fast, too efficient. You mill them, you're putting lava darts into their graveyard. It's not a good time. Amulet Titan as well, having Tasha's be good. This is actually probably an argument to have Tasha's in the sideboard. Just have it be a snipe piece versus Amulet and Is It Prowess specifically, especially when it's behind you. You probably do want cards like this, and especially at an FNM level, which I'm going to discuss in a second, and a MTGO League level where you play up against a higher variance of cards, depending on the time of day that you're playing, especially. You probably do still want Tasha's to some degree, if not in the main board. But I think at a competitive level, at a high level, which I'm going to be maybe putting a bit more focus on, especially in the near future, Tasha's just isn't looking that good at this level. Simic Neoform, especially the cards that they're just like trying to play, like think about like the free spells that they're playing. You know, this is a good example of a deck that is playing the Raptor itself, 7 mana for a free spell. You know, they're not down on mana to play these cards. They're cheating them out for free. You know, the Esper Blink deck, for example, is playing Quantum Riddler for 2 mana. It's not playing it for 5, even though it costs 5. It's not a great time, folks. It's not a great, especially like Solitude. Solitude's a free card. It's being ephemerated. Solitude functionally costs a card in 1 mana. it's just a value that you're getting out of it. It's like you're made up for the card that you're losing off of Ephemerate. You just exile the card off of the evoke cost. It's just cards are being cast for much cheaper than they're meant to be in the modern format right now. Tasha's Hideous Laughter is not worth it. And I think, you know, Tron is there. Tron, generally speaking, I think a lot of mill players actually worded this great today in the mill Discord. But whenever you lose to Tron, it kind of just feels like you made bad deck choices or bad draws versus a Tron deck actually making good decisions. Honestly, it just really does feel like it's a really great matchup. Without Tasha's, it's fine. You take out their Tron land, they're slow enough. Izzet Affinity is the last great example of this. Not only are they so fast to the point where they poop out a massive board, Hurkyl's Recall just generally not relevant, especially after my testing. I thought we could bring it back, but that card's just so bad. There's situations where it's good, like if you end step the Hurkyl's Recall, making them play everything out, like yeah, like they get a bunch of triggers again, and it does slow them down, which is relevant. Still, Izzet Affinity is a deck that if you cast Tasha's Hideous Laughter and you exile, you know, Kappa Cannoneer into, you know, the freaking 8 cast card, the 7 mana 2/2 that draws you 2 cards. Like that's 6/6 12/7. Like you're at 19 mana already. You know what I mean? Like those are cards that are being played usually at play sets. They're usually being played at play sets, not to mention the Thoughtcast, which is 5. You have the freaking 3 mana card from that I'm already forgetting, Pinnacle Emissary, that's at play set as well. There's all these powerful cards in the affinity deck depending on the variant that they're at. It just sucks to be playing Tasha's Hideous Laughter right now, and this is why I'm at this list currently. This isn't like intensely tested. It's not exactly the 6/4 list that was kind of made, although there are interesting elements to that 6/4 list. You know, just being able to play 4 visions is something that I want to do again just to feel alive, I will say. And I probably will be making some gameplay, so let me know in the comment section down below if you want to see gameplay of the 6/4 list with 4 visions. Again, trust me, I do want to feel alive again. 4 visions, absolutely insane. Going visions into visions, nothing better. But in this list, I'm playing 4 Glimpse. I think 4 Glimpse makes sense, especially if you're playing Surgical, and with everything I outlined with Tasha's being bad, I want to go, you know, I'm going to link this down below. This is in my Mox field. Feel free to follow me on my Mox field. I'm trying to do my best to actually now not only include my commander decks on Mox field, but the 1v1 60 card constructed formats that I'm playing, the deck list that I'm actually playing, and kind of updating them. I'm going to try and reduce the amount of variance that I have in the gameplay that I showcase on the channel, and just try and really focus on certain archetypes. I think every so often I will try something new if it's interesting, but I'm going to really try and provide those updates. So follow me on Mox field. This is the current list I'm working with, and let's go over some of the individual card choices. I'm not going to go over everything, but I think Preordain is absolutely a must in this format right now. Moment to moment, you really need to be able to pivot. And one of the things that this deck does struggle with is, honestly, there's a lot of really good one-landers in this deck. There are, and Preordain allows you to keep way more of them, because Preordain on the play allows you to look at the top 4 cards of your deck before you need another land, right? You play a land, you play Preordain, peek, draw a card. It's actually top 5, or no, that is top 4. Peek, you know, bottom draw, then your draw, and then you find another land, or on the draw it lets you look at the top 5 cards of your deck for another land. Really valuable. On top of that, you're able to pivot at a moment's notice and find value and plan ahead. You're able to even potentially hide cards that you might even need against Thought Seizes and stuff. You could kind of put a card on top, then put a card on top of the card that you actually want, draw that card, and kind of hide that for a draw later. There's a lot of situations where Preordain and the selection that it provides is going to be really valuable to you. Multiple Preordains is insane to be able to pivot, but the selection in the mill deck right now is highly key. It's not about card density anymore, because you're not approaching a mid game anymore. You're not getting to turn 4 and turn 5 within a equal board state. You are usually behind or really ahead. And so Visions of Beyond doesn't help that. Visions of Beyond arguably is actually worse, because you draw 3 raw cards out of a random sample. Those could be 3 lands, it could be 2 lands, and it's not helpful. Whereas Preordain allows you to kind of filter that through and find the exact piece that you need. Both have different purposes, but I think Preordain is a must. I think a one of his Vision is fine, but I would do perfectly fine with going to 4 Preordain if it means just not playing them at, like, being able to have this at a higher density. On top of that, Glimpse the Unthinkable just being really powerful, having this be a turn 2 option. It allows you to throw out your crabs a lot more and kind of forces you to, but it also takes out cards from their hand. A lot of times now you're actually not playing crab on 1 because the format is just so full of removal. Dismembers are mainboarded now on top of Prismatic Endings and the energy, I think it's Galvanic Discharge, Lightning Bolts, all that stuff, Fatal Pushes, if not, like there's a lot of removal that's available early in the modern format. And so if you're not getting the mill value, the crab's just not worth it. But now if you're playing Glimpse and Drown in the Loch, you're likely just going to have a turn 2 play. So you throw it out there, you force your opponent to have it. There's no thought involved. You don't feel like you're behind. If your opponent removes that, you just Glimpse and you move on. You just keep going. You go, you make your decisions. You're not having to overcomplicate your curve. And I think Glimpse the Unthinkable really just helps again with those surgical lines, especially when you're on the draw. If your opponent goes, especially against Amulet, turn 1 Amulet, you go turn 1 Crab, they then go turn 2 set up for functionally a win on the turn after. You can then go Glimpse and then take out their, you can surgical out their prime time should you be able to find it, especially if you have a crab. At that point, hopefully you have a fetch. If not, you have a basic land enter or 1 land drop. You've looked at the top 13 cards of their deck after they've drawn. You should be able to find a Primeval Titan from there. Again, something like Goryo's Vengeance, if you don't play the crab and you save up on the Glimpse, if they don't have the Force of Negation, likely they played out a crab on turn 2 and or a frog on turn 2, and you are trying to get a Glimpse the Unthinkable and a surgical to resolve. That's a bit of a stickier situation because they might have a Force of Negation, in which case you've all out, and then all of a sudden you don't even want to untap because they probably have blue up for a counter spell. So you might as well get them to Force of Negation your surgical anyway. So there's all these like kind of back and forth situations, but it just gives you the ability to do something on turn 2 that is valuable if your opponent doesn't have it. And again, hyper enables that surgical extraction that a lot of decks are playing at a play set. So that's kind of important to think about there. Consigned Memory has been at least a 3 of copy in the sideboard of mill for a very long time, if not 4. Really expensive Magic card, unfortunately, especially when it comes to ticks. It's like 30 ticks. It's expensive on MTGO is what I'm trying to say. But Consigned Memory does a lot. Not only does it help against the 3 or 4 Eldrazi decks that feel like they exist at this point, you know, Eldrazi Ramp, Eldrazi Tron, Eldrazi Aggro, your Brood Scale combo. Like there's just so many Eldrazi Temple decks out there in the format right now. And so Consigned Memory is going to help against all of them. This Consigned Memory is actually really useful because it also counters a lot of random triggers that you didn't even kind of think of. Against Ruby Storm, it counters Storm. Against the Eldrazi decks, it counters the extra turn trigger on the cast of Emrakul the Promised End. There's just a lot of things, and especially against Graveyard Hate. Endurance isn't actually that popular in the modern format right now, which is actually really nice for us as a big opening, but it actually also counters ETBs, so it counters the Endurance ETB as well. Just something to think about, right? Unfortunately, against the Affinity decks, it really doesn't counter much, if I'm going to be honest. It doesn't counter Kappa Cannoneer. It counters the trigger, which does mean something, because now it's now blockable, so there is that, but I'm probably not bringing in Consigned Memory against Izzet Affinity, if I'm going to be honest. It's going to be against decks that I suspect have Endurance, which is very few, and largely it's going to be the Eldrazi decks. Now, you could actually bring this against the Blink deck. There's a lot of ETBs there. There's a fair amount of triggers as well. It just feels like overboarding. In my experience, you generally have like a good matchup against that, if not close to 50-50. I think once they started putting in 4 Riddlers in there, the matchup, I think, kind of went in their favor, especially with like Riddler and Frog. But if you play 4 Field of Ruins, you do get to disrupt or have a good upper hand against a 3-color mana base, where if you mill them a little bit, you can find some of their basics, and something like Consign doesn't matter. Like you're playing your main plan, you're able to disrupt them passively. You don't need to bring in dedicated cards like this to stop ETB. So again, Eldrazi and some amount of Graveyard Hate, which is kind of nice. Notably, this actually is kind of funny, but it does actually stop the ETB trigger of Rest in Peace. This matters because I have played in Pioneer the Loomer combo deck. I played the oh my god, that Merfolk blue into when it enters, you counter target activate or triggered ability. If it's a planeswalker, it like loses all abilities. Like countering and a triggered ability, like I remember learning from that and extending it to Consigned Memory that I do actually get to counter the exile effect on the Rest in Peace, which was so valuable because I was able to then untap and like dig for like an artifact removal for the Rest in Peace, and it was great. Anyway, Consigned can do that. Extirpate, you need this right now because you're not playing Graveyard Hate generally in the mill deck. You're not playing Soul Guide Lanterns. So Consign is having to pull double duty on that while Extirpate ends up being Graveyard Hate. To be honest, you don't really want Graveyard Hate anyway. Nile Spellbomb is like an interesting option that I think some people have explored in and out of certain metagames because it does allow you to exile graveyards while drawing at the same time, where Soul Guide Lantern is just exile or draw, which is valuable in certain cases, right? Especially if you're playing multiple copies of Visions Beyond, like the 6/4 deck list. But Extirpate just being like uninteractable is so important because you can't cast, your opponent can't cast spells or activate abilities, which really helps versus Psychic Frog, right? So not only does it help versus, you know, the spell pierces, the counter spells, whatever, flash abilities, but Extirpate also helps versus Psychic Frog, which again is extremely relevant in this modern metagame. And so you're having to just play like 7, sometimes even 8 copies of Surgical Effects across your 75. It's just what Modern Mill has to do right now to compete, in my opinion. And so that's why I'm playing 3. Mystical Dispute, I feel like, is like, it's so important. I think Mystical Dispute has to really make a legitimate comeback, if not Spell Pierces in the main, just to be able to provide that extra disruption against the random incidental spells. Like being able to counter the, you know, random burn spell on your crab, burn spell to your life, or, you know, the Mox Opal versus Affinity, you know, you're on the play, you get an island out, your opponent starts going, you know, Pinnacle Emissary and a Mox Opal, and they want to cast more spells. Like countering that Mox Opal is so important because that's usually their second source of mana. Mystical Dispute specifically doesn't stop that, but it helps versus the Frog decks. Murktide Regent isn't that relevant in the metagame right now. It's there, it exists in the kind of edges, but Mystical Dispute helps against Force of Negation, the counter spells, the spell pierces of the world, but also it just helps against Frog. It just makes sure Frogs doesn't resolve, because once Frog resolves, smart opponents are going to be able to, you know, stop, you know, your Crypt Incursions and all that stuff. And they're going to be able to stop your surgical targets. Like you have to really change the way you play the game once Psychic Frog resolves in like the worst way possible. It stops so much of what this deck is doing. And so I think just having that extra ability to like play a counter war better is really powerful. I'm right now at 2. I can see an argument for 3, but then you're having to probably drop like a valuable removal spell that also hits Planeswalkers. That's what the 2 removal spells usually in the sideboard slots are having to do. And so having to lose those is like kind of problematic, or like dropping Consign is probably a no-go. I think 2's fine. I think 3's probably best. It's just sideboards are tight. That's what sideboards are meant to be. Meat Hook Massacre is important just as like a board wipe, but also specifically versus something like the decks that go off with Glaring Fleshraker, as well as the Boros deck that can go off with the Goblin Bombardment. Meat Hook Massacre says, you know, black X, you know, each creature gains -X, -X. This is also relevant against Urza Saga tokens. So if your Affinity opponent has like a giant board of like 1/1s, if you wipe that board and give -X, -X, that Urza Saga token likely now has not a lot of artifacts to kind of contend with. And so Meat Hook Massacre can then kind of wipe it out with the -X effect. You know, it's relevant there. Whenever a creature an opponent controls dies, you gain 1 life. So that's going to be nice because the Goblin Bombardment is going to be outdone in the Boros matchup. But then against Glaring Fleshraker specifically, this is actually really nice, not only in the Glaring Fleshraker matchup against like those spawn tokens, but also against like Brood Scale combo, where they might have Brood Scale out and try and combo off with the Fleshraker right there and kind of wipe you out. But then also it's kind of nice that if they do that, they can't beat you that turn. They have to wait till the turn after to then like attack with an infinitely large Basking Brood Scale. So that's kind of nice. It gives you an extra turn. So Meat Hook Massacre does have those unique niche cases. It's a board wipe that helps primarily against Boros, but does have use cases against stuff like Glaring Fleshraker or other combo decks that are looking to, you know, kind of mess around with weenie creatures. So Meat Hook's kind of nice there. And so that's where I ultimately kind of land on Tasha's. The last thing I didn't mention, actually, I'm just realizing this now before I go to my Tasha spiel, is that I didn't mention Crypt Incursion. I'm actually playing 2 Crypts in the main. I think with the amount of decks out there that put stuff into the graveyard, it's really valuable. It's really good against Boros Energy. And I think it helps against Reanimator strategies. Like sometimes all you need is an extra turn or 2 because you're top decking, and your top decks as a mill player, generally speaking, on average are worse than the average deck right now because of the extremely high quality, like card quality out of Universes Beyond, Modern Horizons, and the standard sets right now to compete. The card quality is just unmatched, and Mill hasn't gotten an update in a really, really long time. It's gotten like adjacent moves for the sideboard and everything, but it's not anything relevant in terms of a mill spell. And so we're probably going to have to wait a really long time unless we get mill being something relevant out of just a random mechanic. I will say Drown in the Lock is kind of a good example of that. It was a playset removal spell that became really relevant in a non-mill set. Like, okay, there were mill cards. There were mill cards in Eldraine. It just wasn't the most relevant thing in that format, right? You have Merfolk Secret Keeper and all that stuff. It's just that we could get something like Drown in the Loch, potentially to be maybe another analogous interaction spell that could be relevant there. But Crypt Incursion right now, I just feel like it's so important to give you that extra turn or two because we don't have spells like that. We don't have the card quality. So I'm playing Crypt Incursion in the main just to free up some cards in my sideboard so that I can still play 2 Tashas in my sideboard. And that's where I ultimately land on Tashas. I don't think it's a good card at all right now. I think you can succeed with it. And I think if you're going to take this deck competitively, quote unquote, to like maybe a small event, a challenge or something like that, you can't play Tasha's Hideous Laughter. You're just net decking at that point. You're not actually testing. I don't think on average valuable testing will lead you to the fact that Tasha is actually a good card. And on average, you are probably sideboarding this card out a lot, which is a whole other metric to really consider. Just because you sideboard out a card doesn't mean it's bad. Not necessarily. It could be really good in the main board. It could be whatever it is. But Tasha's Hideous Laughter, you're not happy casting it. You're always sideboarding it out in the vast majority of matchups. So why have it to like specifically snipe out Amulet when it's a good matchup anyway? Specifically snipe out Prowess, which it's good against, but it's not really that highly represented. So you play it in the sideboard. And Boros, which is like, okay, it's good, but it's not really the primary problem. You're casting this on 3 and then you have bigger problems from there. To solve Boros, you want to be putting cards in their graveyard and casting Crypt Incursion, not Tasha's Hideous Laughter. And so largely, I'm putting this away. It's going to be a sideboard. Kind of sucks. I have foils of this card. I would like to be flexing foils all the time. But right now, it feels like Mill is largely in the Mesmeric Orb days, where you just didn't have the card quality to match up to where Modern is right now. And you were doing powerful things. You still had the Surgicals, but you didn't have like 2 copies of Crabs at the time. You just had Hedron Crab. And so again, the card quality was so poor that you were having to do extreme things like Visions of Beyond and Surgical Extraction to really make it work. And now that's not even extreme. Drawing 3 cards doesn't even make any sense anymore in a world where Orcish Bowmasters is a thing. And especially in a world where Surgical Extraction has to be your most relevant thing. In decks now have so much quality along with quantity that Surgical Extraction has lost so much value that you're having to maximize on it to really make sure you can eke out everything you get. And so Mill without an update is just really low quality in terms of the cards that it can play. And it's kind of the unfortunate state that we're in. I think people can succeed with this card, but my conclusion is that it's just not a good deck right now. And I think it's probably better off that it isn't. But it's not like one of those low-key decks. It's not a card it's not a deck that can necessarily snipe things. There are good matchups for it, but it's not a low-key sleeper. It's just not a good deck right now. And that's okay. Maybe something will come down the line. We've had our times where we were up. And again, a lot of high-skill pilots still play this deck to big success. We're just having to wait for something because Modern is just a completely different environment. It's super fast. It's very efficient. It's not a forgiving format at all. And whether or not you like that, that's up to you. I am still a big fan of Modern to this day, but it also just means that my favorite deck in the format just doesn't have a place. Let me know what you think in the comment section down below, whether you're a Modern player or a Mill player in general. Let me know how you're feeling about the Modern format in totality. I've been making a lot of kind of Modern metagame status videos or whatever. But let me know how you're feeling about maybe Magic in general. Maybe you're not a fan of Modern and you're playing another format, you're finding more time there, or you're not liking everything else and you're actually enjoying the gameplay of Modern and you were excited about Pro Tour Edge of Eternities. Sound off in the comments below.